It will automatically, Megan.
Okay.
It should.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, class. We're getting going. And we are live.
Yeah, you're loading live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another wonderful evening of Cannabis Night School presented by WholesomeCo. Glad you all could join us. We're just going to wait a couple of moments for the rest of the class to arrive. So just sit tight, grab your pen and paper, get ready to take some great notes. We got a very excellent and special episode coming at you tonight. So just sit tight. Thanks for joining us. We'll be getting started soon. Good, coming at you tonight.
Oops.
So all right. Man, happy Pride Month, everyone. Also, hope everyone was able to go out and enjoy some of the festivities over the past weekend. And like I said, for all of those that are just joining now, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes for the rest of the class to arrive. Please, if you guys don't mind, we'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a quick share, just so we can get, maximize the reach for this little educational event that we're doing. We'd greatly appreciate it. So please feel free to share this video onto your timelines, onto any other groups that you're a part of. Well, we'd love to have a nice, large, full classroom. Everybody is welcome. And so in just a moment, we'll go ahead and get started, guys. Wet the old whistle real quick. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us again. We're going to get started in just a moment. So if you guys wouldn't mind giving us this, or giving this stream a quick share to your friends and family. We're going to be covering some really interesting topics that they are probably going to be interested in. So please help us get the word out. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll be getting started in just a moment. Let's see. All right. So let's kick it off, guys. Welcome everybody to our fourth installment of Cannabis Night School presented by WholesomeCo. We're so happy you all joined us. As per usual, this event is in partnership with Utah Patients Coalition. I am Julian Miranda, the Community Engagement Manager for WholesomeCo. This is our fourth episode. This has been such a fun and great experience putting these together, sharing some information and knowledge with you all. So happy you could join us. Definitely don't forget to share it to your friends and family. And I'll hand it over to Megan so she can introduce her stuff quickly. Des, unfortunately, is playing hooky tonight, so she's not making it. I know she's a usual suspect, but we got the amazing Megan Keller stepping in to provide some support.
Hey, I'm Megan. I want you to, if you need any help, go to utahpatients.org. If we have a subsidy program we are enrolling terminally ill patients for help buying their medicine. WholesomeCo is great to help us with that. And I'm just here to answer any questions tonight. I will be taking questions and writing them down so that we can answer questions throughout the program and afterwards. And I hope to be able to help anybody. And I also answer some questions on the Facebook page when Des isn't available. I'll throw it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. Yeah, like she said, definitely go check out utahpatientsco.org. Really great information there and services for the patients. And our next presenter, Dr. Anden.
Hi, I'm Corey Anden. I'm a physician in the Ogden area, and I practice musculoskeletal type medicine and pain management, and I've become a specialist in medical cannabis. I love seeing people who can have benefit from using medical cannabis. I'm enrolled in the University of Maryland program in medical cannabis science and therapeutics. And I'm always learning more and interested in learning more and sharing that information with all of you.
Beautiful, thank you. And our final guest presenter.
Hi, my name is Olivia Kulander. Thanks for putting this on. I'm so excited to be here. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for Boojum Groups, and we are a cannabis processor. Our lab is up in Heber City in the Wasatch Back, and we focus mostly on cannabis infused products. So we, go for things that are more marketed to the medical market. So things like oral sprays and capsules and things like that that can be safely dosed.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, definitely check out their Instagram page, a Boojum Group at Instagram. They produce some excellent educational content. We're so fortunate to have them and have Olivia here collaborating with us. So really great organization over at Boojum Group. All right, so tonight's topic, how cannabis interacts with your body. So tonight we're going to be kind of diving into a little bit about the endocannabinoid system, explaining what that is and why you should know about it, explaining what phytocannabinoids are, what terpenes are, touching on the entourage effect as well. And then lastly, kind of giving a quick breakdown on the different cannabis varieties, followed by a Q&A. We definitely encourage all our audience members to submit your questions throughout this presentation. We'll do our best to answer them throughout, but if not, we will definitely get to them at the end during our Q&A. Just a quick disclaimer as well, any dosing suggestions offered in this presentation should not be taken as medical advice. We definitely recommend and encourage you guys to have those conversations with your QMP or with a pharmacist at your local pharmacy, cannabis pharmacy. Again, the information in this presentation is meant to introduce you to some of these terms and concepts and hopefully encourage you guys to dig a little bit deeper and just increase your awareness. And of course, a very special thank you to our wonderful collaborators, Utah Patients Coalition. It's always a pleasure working with you guys. Human Nature, Dr. Anden's newly rebranded clinic. Definitely check them out if you're in the Ogden area. And of course, Boojum, an excellent processor here in Utah. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this and joining us on this journey to education. And so and then lastly, just a little quick tidbit about WholesomeCo. We are a licensed and registered cannabis pharmacy here in Utah. We're located in West Bountiful. We're open 7 days a week, Monday through Sunday. You can see our contact info below if you have any questions or would like to get in touch. And lastly, in addition to our excellent selection of products and a very knowledgeable staff, we also offer remote and virtual pharmacist consultations if you prefer to do that from the comfort of your own home. And we deliver across the majority of the state as well. So definitely check out that service if you haven't. And without any further ado, we'll hop into the meat and potatoes for our class tonight. And so to kick things off, we're going to start by talking about the endocannabinoid system. It's basically the largest signaling system in the human body and is the mechanism by which our body processes and integrates the various components of cannabis. And to shed a little bit more light on the endocannabinoid system, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Anden, and feel free to take it away.
Sure. So the endocannabinoid system is fascinating, and it's important to realize that it really wasn't identified by researchers until the early 1990s. Now, that's not very long ago. That's like saying we didn't know that we had hormones until the 1990s. So the discovery was stimulated by the finding of the active chemicals in the cannabis plant. Then scientists wanted to know, well, what are these chemicals doing? How are they acting on the body? And that led to discovery of endocannabinoid receptors, and then the ubiquitous, that means everywhere in the body, endocannabinoid system. So the receptors are cellularly based. They're in many cells throughout the body, particularly in the central nervous system and brain, as well as the immune system. So that sort of explains why some of the chemicals that are in the cannabis plant can have psychoactive effects, as well as help with anxiety and calming and other mood disorders. And then in the immune system, decrease inflammation and pain, and just help us all to feel better. So the main function of the endocannabinoid system is to create balance. So all of those other systems in the body, our gastrointestinal system, our circulatory system, our hormones from our female and male productive organs, all of that needs to be regulated in some ways so things aren't too high or too low. And that's where the endocannabinoid system kicks in to help regulate all of that. So homeostasis is the word for balance that it creates in the body. And we're not the only ones that have an endocannabinoid system. Olivia, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I find this absolutely fascinating that essentially all animals except for insects have it, specifically all vertebrates. And they've also found it in animals like sea squirts, which is incredible. So sea squirts and humans last shared a common ancestor about 600 million years ago. And so the fact is we have had this system in our bodies for about 600 million years. That's, you know, since we were sea cucumbers slugging along the bottom of the ocean. They found that the cannabinoid receptors themselves, they think probably evolved like when fish first started to go onto land, because pretty much all land vertebrates have it. And also certain like stonefish and little like crawly fish have it too. So it's just pretty fascinating that a lot of animals have this, and it works for them the same way that it works for us, which is why you don't want to give your dog THC or something. But yeah, just the fact that it's been there for pretty much as long as we've been animals is pretty cool to me.
So I think that was a great point, that last point about keeping it away from our pets. Because I know there are some CBD products that are on the market for pets, but THC we definitely want to keep away from our furry friends. Is that correct, Olivia?
It is correct. You will see places that say that it's toxic, and that's not really true, other than in the same way that like THC can be toxic for us. But dogs, for example, have a lot more CB1 receptors in their brains. So even a tiny little bit can send them on a really bad trip. So essentially, like, getting your dog high is a bad idea. They don't understand what's happening, and it's a lot more intense for them than it is for you. But at the same time, it's probably not going to kill them.
I am aware that there are some veterinarians that are learning more about cannabis as medicine for animals. So that would be a good resource. There's more research and studies on that, like there are for humans, there are on animals. And I agree, it is fascinating.
Absolutely. And CBD is, you know, very safe for them and works really well. So
Awesome, beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. And so, Dr. Anden, could you maybe speak to, you know, on a personal level, how we may differ on our endocannabinoid systems?
Sure. So we're all humans, and we all have an endocannabinoid system, but it may be working or functioning differently in different people. So we talk about this term endocannabinoid tone, meaning how healthy is your endocannabinoid system? Like we might say, how healthy is your circulatory system, your heart, and your blood vessels? How healthy are your lungs? So same thing goes for endocannabinoid system. And we'll talk about this a little more. So the endocannabinoid system is the receptors and also the chemicals that are innate already in our body that interact with that system. So some people may have a dysfunction of that. We think that there are some diseases that may be actually linked to dysfunctions in the endocannabinoid system. Maybe some central nervous system brain disorders like Alzheimer's disease and dementia. or autism. And even as far as to say some gastrointestinal disorders or even diabetes, heart disease, in some way may be related to a dysfunction in the endocannabinoid system. So right now, the problem is we don't really have any blood tests that we can check to monitor how our endocannabinoid system is working. So, so I guess we just know, depending on how we're feeling, how cannabis as medicine may help us to feel better. So that's kind of the theory there. And there are ways that we can improve our endocannabinoid tone. So, and these may be a little obvious, but again, supports the healthy lifestyle practices. Healthy lifestyle, healthy, happy body. So a good, healthy diet. So these days, plant-based diets seem to be trending. So more plants, less carbs seems to be important because of the important nutrients that are in vitamins and minerals that are in vegetables and fruits, and that sort of thing. Staying active and having a good exercise program. So that means cardio exercise, getting our aerobic system toned up, being strong, not being overweight, because the extra fat, if we're overweight, the fat cells actually have their own kind of metabolism. They're a separate organ system, and that can interact with different parts of our body and cause problems. So yoga and meditation are very important for the endocannabinoid system. Also cold, so cold baths, ice baths, Wim Hof type therapy also contributed to improving the endocannabinoid tone. And of course, we all need good sleep, proper rest. And we don't get enough of that in the world today, right? We're stressed and we don't sleep well. So trying to get good sleep is important.
Perfect, beautiful. So definitely, just like anything else in healthcare, you want to take as holistic of an approach as you can. Make sure we're checking all the boxes of not just using the right medicines, but also taking the right care of our bodies too, so that way the medicine can benefit us to its fullest potential. Is that correct?
Correct. The medicine will work better if we have a healthy foundation for it to work on.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Excellent. I find that such an interesting idea that, there's not really tests that we do for, for endocannabinoids. And it makes me think of like a future where they will be testing for things like that. And we can actually see how things like yoga and diet and exercise sort of affect those levels in our bodies. Super fascinating.
And also like people who have a disorder compared to healthy people, what is the disruption in the endocannabinoid system and how could cannabis help supplement that?
Yeah, that'd be so interesting. I know
it will be.
Like I think there's a marker that you can look for if you've had a genetic test, like a 23andMe or Ancestry.com or something like that. I forget which gene it is, but you can look at it and it will, tell you whether you're essentially a slow or fast metabolizer of THC. So that's like kind of a cool addition to like what kind of endocannabinoid tone you have is how fast you're processing those chemicals. And you can actually like look at your gene and see if you're going to be heavily affected or not.
Right, because that can affect dosing. That can help with dosing.
That's super interesting, guys. And just like so many other things in the cannabis industry right now, especially with the endocannabinoid system, we're just now, kind of scratching or at the tip of the iceberg. Like Olivia was saying, the future of endocannabinoid research and how we can better understand it is very bright, and hopefully we can see some progress on that in the upcoming years. And
I think an important thing is cannabis has been used as medicine for 5,000, 6,000 years safely. We know there's no lethal dose of it. We're just now understanding how exactly it does those things and works.
Perfect. So now now that we understand what the endocannabinoid system is and why it's important, can you shed a little bit of light on, kind of the components of it, what's going on in our body, and please elaborate for us.
Sure, love to. So the word endocannabinoid means, endo means in the body, and cannabinoids refer to those specific chemical compounds that are in the cannabis plant. So our body has chemicals that are similar to those found in the plant. So understand, we found the plant chemicals first, then scientists discovered the system in our body that those chemicals interacted with, so the receptors. And then they determined, oh, look, well, there are chemicals already in our body that look like the plant chemicals. And the ones in the plant are called phyto, P-H-Y-T-O means plant. So we have endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. So generally when you hear the word cannabinoid, we're typically referring to the plant cannabinoids. So sometimes they just shorten it that way. So the endocannabinoids in the body, the two main ones that have been identified and studied so far are called anandamide, which is otherwise known as the bliss molecule. So bliss means happiness, and it's associated with the good feelings. And then the other one, 2-AG, and there are some other ones, but not fully studied and identified, but these are the main ones. So then we talked about the receptors. So the receptors means it's a lock and a key system of sorts. So the endocannabinoids are the key and the receptors are the lock. So the key unlocks the receptor, and that's what initiates the effects on our body. The main receptors are CB1 and CB2. So CB stands for cannabinoid. So CB1 receptors are interestingly very highly distributed in the central nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord and nerves, and they mostly react with anandamide. And then the CB2 receptors are mostly in the immune system. So immune system is what treats infection and inflammation. So they are in our blood cells. And of course, our blood cells are all over our body, traveling in our circulation. They're created in the bone marrow, but they're also in our tonsils and our spleen, places, organs in our body that treat infection and protect us from infection and getting sick. And 2-AG primarily interacts with the CB2 receptors, but it's not all or none. There's a lot of crossover, and there are also plenty of receptors, as we can see in the poster on the right, in many different organs in the circulatory system and the gastrointestinal tract, the reproductive organs in men and women. So the endocannabinoid system is regulating those systems and processes that are happening there. And then the third important component are the enzymes that interact with the endocannabinoids. So once we produce those chemicals, there's processes in our body that break them down so that they can be reformed again, or so they don't get into too high of a number. So really, when our body produces those endocannabinoids, they're only around for a short period of time. And then the enzymes break them down. There are also important enzymes that metabolize them. So it's a quick process where they're there, they do their job, and then they go away. And so
Dr. Anden, we had a question pertaining to the enzymes that I just saw. Do you have any familiarity with, let me see if I can pronounce this right, olivitolic acid? Is olivitolic acid one of those enzymes, is the question?
Well, that would be likely a precursor or a component, a chemical that becomes part of those. Generally, enzymes have a name that ends in like ACE, pertaining to the function that they do.
Gotcha.
But there are lots of different, chemicals that become part of those enzymes. I did write some of them down, but it gets really chemical. It's a lot of organic chemistry to talk about, because there are enzymes that are specific to the metabolism breakdown of anandamide, and others that are specific to the synthesis and breakdown of 2-AG and others. And
maybe we'll leave that for our 201
Sure.
series.
Right. And I'll look it up a little bit. I have some notes, but we can come back to that.
Sure.
Olivia acid is what combines with the geranyl pyrophosphate for the regular cannabinoids. So the varin cannabinoids, which is a different section or category of cannabinoids, is made with a different acid, but all sort of the main categories of cannabinoids that don't have a V in the name are coming from olivotolic acid originally.
Gotcha.
All right. See,
Great.
we need the chemist.
Great question there, Beth. You know your stuff, and great answers to our wonderful presenters. Beautiful. So
can I point out one thing on that last slide?
Absolutely.
Before I move on, I just wanted to point out, I think it's really interesting, and I think most people think it's really cool, the distribution of those CB1 receptors. So those CB1 receptors that you see there in brain and spinal cord that are in the central nervous system, that's the one that when it's activated, that's psychoactive. So that's what, THC is interacting with, which we'll get to, but I just wanted to hit this while we are on this slide here, because those receptors are mostly in where they are in the brain is going to affect what's going on for you when, if you take THC. So they're mostly in the cerebellum, they're in places that affect memory, motor, executive decision-making, things like that, but they're not very well represented in the brainstem or areas of your brain that deal with essentially keeping you alive on the most basic level, which is why you aren't going to overdose on THC, because your body's not going to stop breathing like it might with opioids perhaps, or something like that. Your body is going to kind of keep you alive, even if your brain and your emotions are freaking out.
I think that last point there.
Very important. Great. Yes.
Very important.
Yes.
So
yes.
Excellent point. Thank you so much.
And then, so that makes me think of another point of the ones in the immune system help modulate the immune system. So anti-inflammatory and such effects. But let's say a person has an infection, we want the immune system to be activated to treat the infection. But if people have an autoimmune disorder like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, where the immune system is too strong, the endocannabinoid system helps to lower that down, again, pointing to that creating balance in that immune system.
So it just blows my mind that this is such an important and all-encompassing system, and we just discovered this back in the 90s, and this is also something, Dr. Anden, is this something that's taught in medical school, either back then or currently that you are aware of? I mean,
no, so I went to medical school in the 80s. And we never heard of the endocannabinoid system. We certainly heard of cannabis,
right?
But we were not taught anything about the endocannabinoid system. It really wasn't discovered totally till the end of the 80s and the 90s. And even then, I think it was sort of kept a secret in some ways. And it was hard to research because the cannabis per se was illegal, other than one place supplying it. And there's a lot to learn there.
Well,
we didn't learn anything about that. And one wonders, where we have all of these pharmaceuticals that target the central nervous system and mood and brain, they're working similarly to how the endocannabinoid system works, but a lot of pharmaceuticals we know have side effects. One wonders, if we had been using cannabis as medicine all along, if we might have, had people healthier and less harm from some drugs. So
There's
Real.
so many different rabbit holes that we can dive into, but for the sake of the presentation, I'm going to try and keep this ball rolling, guys. Although all that information has been wonderful, so thank you so much. So our next topic is going to be phytocannabinoids. Where do they come from and what do they do?
Hey, guys, Beth has a question before we move on.
Sure.
She says, is it CBG or CBC that is the best anandamide reuptake inhibitor? Internet keeps changing its mind.
What's the question again?
Is it CBG or CBC that is the best I can't say that word.
Anandamide.
Thank you. Reuptake inhibitor.
Anandamide reuptake inhibitor.
I've CBC, but I just think I read that in one article, so I'm not sure like which is better, but I know that CBC does do that.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Megan. That was a very good question. You know, we may not have every single answer ready for you guys, but definitely please send them our way, and we're always looking for something new to look into. And so again, class or audience, you know, definitely if you have any questions about phytocannabinoids or cannabinoids in general that are on the top of your head, we're going to be discussing those in just a moment. And before we really get into the phytocannabinoids themselves, I wanted to take a moment just to clear some misconception and explain where these phytocannabinoids are truly coming from on the cannabis plant. And Olivia, would you mind helping me out with that?
Absolutely. Trichomes are so cool. Just look at them. You know, I think it's really interesting that the symbol, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but the symbol for cannabis universally has been that, you know, 7-leafed or 7-sectioned leaf. So, you know, that's sort of a logo and a cultural symbol, and you see it everywhere. But, you know, if were to go and eat that or light it up, it's probably not going to do that much for you. And that's because all of these chemicals that we're talking about are coming from the trichomes. And there you can see pictures of them on the screen. But these trichomes are essentially like little biochemical factories. And so those secretory cells that you see there on the bottom, those are producing CBG, which is then turned by enzymes in the head of the trichome into CBD, THC, CBC, and then further into other ones. So I just think that it's fascinating that, you know, the plant is growing these trichomes that make these phytocannabinoids that work for us. Aside from the phytocannabinoids, there's terpenes in there and flavonoids. And it's kind of cool to think about the fact that, like, even though I was talking about sea squirts having an endocannabinoid system, plants do not have endocannabinoid system. So cannabis does not have an endocannabinoid system that it's making these phytocannabinoids for. Instead, these phytocannabinoids have evolved, and these trichomes have evolved purely to just protect the plant, or at least that's what the theses are these days. So the idea is that, you know, a lot of terpenes that we see are antiviral, antimicrobial, insecticidal even sometimes. So the plant uses and grows these trichomes and keeps them in their most critical areas, so the reproductive areas of the female plants, to protect that next generation. And it makes these protect itself. And they're doing that through the chemicals that are inside them, which is why they're making those, but also just the stickiness. Little bugs get trapped in that. It just doesn't taste good if you're an herbivore walking around looking for lunch. This little oily kind of sticky sap on the outside of the plant. It also protects from the plant from environmental things. So like dry desiccating winds aren't going to dry it out as fast if it's got this like protective sticky layer over it, trapping air inside. It protects it from UV light, so it doesn't get sunburned as easily. So these trichomes are super useful for the plant, but not for the same reason that they're useful for us.
Gotcha. So an extremely versatile part of the cannabis plant. Thank you so much for clearing that up for us. Again, everyone, the the medicinal components of cannabis are not in the leaves, they're not in the flower matter, they're actually on those little trichomes. So just again, just for that clarification, so we're all on the same page.
If I could
Now,
add,
oh yeah, go ahead, please do.
just quickly, I just wanted to say, so for extraction, like for something like an FSO, these trichomes are being dissolved in ethanol or sometimes butane, depending on where they're making it. So they're essentially dissolving that outside cuticle and then getting out the terpenes and phytocannabinoids from inside, versus something like hash where they're knocking these off. So if you've ever looked at hash under a microscope, it looks like a bunch of these trichomes in a pile and a little bit dried out. So just
The whole idea is to get the trichomes and get the oils from the trichomes.
Exactly. And that's also why vaporizing works, because when you're using a dryer vaporizer, it's vaporizing the trichomes, not the flower matter, and that's where all the medicine is coming from. So again, beautiful, just making sure we're all on the same page and clearing up any potential misconceptions. So now that we know where these phytocannabinoids and other components like terpenes are coming from, I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Anden to speak a little bit to exactly what phytocannabinoids are, and also just to give us an idea on what are the cannabinoids that we see in highest concentration, in some of the products in Utah currently. And so please take it away.
Sure. So as I stated before, phyto means plant. So phytocannabinoids are just in general saying cannabinoids. We're referring to the plant produced and plant derived cannabinoids that are in the medicine that is available in our pharmacies. So there are a current number, I've seen different numbers. It's safe to say over 100. I've seen 140, 150 being stated as the number of different phytocannabinoids that the plant produces. So that doesn't mean that we know a lot about 150 different chemicals. So remember, this whole system has only been identified in the past 25 years, and the plant, the cannabinoids weren't discovered till the 1960s. So that's not a lot of time. So there are some main ones. Of course, we know the THC and the CBD. And as Olivia was stating, in the raw plant, the cannabinoids are in an acid form. So it's CBGA, THCA, CBDA. So those do have medicinal benefits, we can see on the list here. So some people do say they can just eat the cannabis. You can make a tea out of the cannabis, not the leaves necessarily, but the flower where you have the trichomes. So CBDA has anti-inflammatory and anti-nausea, maybe anti-tumor, anti-cancer effects as well. There's just not going to be any psychoactivity. THCA also has similar effects, can be beneficial. So if people want to be truly organic, they can really just eat cannabis, suck on the cannabis bud, make tea. But of course, we're more familiar with having the activated cannabinoids, and they become activated with generally heat is the method we use, but other chemical processing also activates those. So now we have the main cannabinoid. We say THC, we mean the delta 9. THC, that's kind of the go-to cannabinoid that people are looking for when they're shopping for the cannabis. That's the psychoactive effects, which are truly therapeutic in situations if we're treating stress and anxiety, PTSD. So psychoactivity is okay. But there are also other effects that people may not be aware of with the delta 9 THC. So it does have anti-inflammatory, pain relieving effects, can help nausea, often tends to, at certain doses, produce more relaxation and sedation and help with sleep. In combination with CBD, there's often anti-tumor effects. And then, people talk about the munchies. Yes, it tends to stimulate appetite more than depress appetite, and is very good for muscle spasms as well. Then we have the similar compound delta 8 THC that is often less, there's small amounts of that in the cannabis plant, but can be made chemically from the other cannabinoids, and has not quite the psychoactive potency of delta 9. I've seen 25 to 75% psychoactivity, and maybe Olivia can add to that, but does have similar anti-anxiety and analgesic pain relieving effects. The other common ones you might see now are CBN. So CBN is sleep promoting. CBN comes from delta 9 THC as it degrades over time as your cannabis gets old. Your flower, if you have it at home, it sets out, it's not stored properly. But over time, it will transform into CBN. So people might say that their older cannabis still has psychoactive effects. There could be some delta 9 THC, but a lot of it's going to be CBN, which is more kind of sedating, sleep promoting, does help pain, and other effects. We can see muscle spasms, similar to THC.
And real quick, if I may, Dr. Anden. So
Mhm.
currently, I don't think there are many products, if at all, that are exclusively, selling just concentrated CBN products. Hopefully we can get that, in the market soon. I'm really curious to hear from the audience and also from Olivia and you as well, Dr. Anden. What are some other cannabinoids that you would like to maybe see more available in Utah's market?
I think THCV, the varins, are going to be very popular. That's an appetite suppressant. It also helps with blood sugar regulation and metabolism. So for our population of people that are overweight, have diabetes, THCV could be very helpful for regulating metabolism and weight loss and that sort of thing. That's going to help a lot of different medical problems. What do you think, Olivia?
My favorite cannabinoid, pet cannabinoid that I think is going to be big one day is CBC, or cannabichromine, I think is how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of good things to it. As we mentioned earlier, it actually it inhibits the uptake of anandamides, so it means kind of gives you more of your natural endocannabinoid floating around there. It's also anti-inflammatory and antibacterial. It helps fight tumor cells. It's neuroprotective, helps against like migraines. It's got a long list, antidepressant and pain reliever. But beyond that, it interests me because it is the only one, so along with CBD and THC, that has an enzyme that makes it in the trichome. So the trichomes have, THC synthase, CBD synthase, and CBC synthase. So those three enzymes making THC, A, and CBDA, and CBCA. And so I just think that means that there's a lot of potential for genetics for that, because that can be bred essentially. So plants can be bred to produce more CBC, so it can be natural, as opposed to the rest of these, which mostly have to be lab derived, like Delta 8, for example. This is one that you can grow a lot of it naturally. And I think that just the fact that CBD and THC have proven so beneficial, I think there's a good chance that CBC is gonna show us some things one of these days.
And then CBG, I believe if you harvest your plants early, before the CBGA transforms to THCA and CBDA, then you get more CBG, which also has nice medical benefits, not psychoactive. But yes, helps muscle relaxer, mood stabilizer. CBD and CBG are good for bone growth. So if people had broken bones or they have osteoporosis, CBD and CBG could be very helpful in those circumstances. I think people know a lot about CBD. I hear a lot of people taking CBD for sleep, but CBD actually is calming, but in most cases alerting at our typical doses. So may or may not be helpful for sleep, whereas the delta-9 THC is more helpful for sleep. But CBD and CBG, I think, are kind of really good medical workhorses to treat a lot of different conditions that are common to the human population.
Beautiful, beautiful. Very well put, guys. Thank you so much. Moving right along. So, now that we kind of understand, what our endocannabinoid system is, we understand we have these endocannabinoids. Can you just shed a little bit of light on explaining why and I think you did a little bit earlier, but can you just reiterate, why these phytocannabinoids work with our endocannabinoid system?
So they interact in the body similarly to the endocannabinoids. So THC binds to the CB1 and CB2 receptors directly, and stimulates effects similar to anandamide. CBD, a lot of scientists are still trying to figure out exactly how CBD works, but one of the ways that CBD works is that it doesn't directly bind to the receptors, but it inhibits the enzyme that breaks down anandamide. So therefore you have more anandamide in circulation because it's not being broken down or metabolized. But CBD and THC also interact with a variety of other different receptors. Scientists are still working on figuring that out. I would say, when phytocannabinoids actually support and help our body produce our own natural endocannabinoids, that seems like a win-win, right? So we're helping our body to work functionally the way it's supposed to.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Anden. All right, so moving right along. So we've covered the phytocannabinoids, really big component of bunch of medical benefits to them, but sorry about that. But terpenes also play a big role in that. In
Before
addition
we
to,
move along, we have a question.
oh, absolutely, go for it.
Should we keep our flour in the fridge?
That's a good
My understanding is that the best temperature is 50 to 70 degrees, cool, dry area, more like a bottom drawer, not necessarily in the refrigerator. Refrigerators are around 40 something degrees. It might be a little cool. And I know, some people do freeze their cannabis, and that's probably okay. It stores it, but it can make if you're storing your flour, it can make it brittle and break the trichomes. So that's a consideration. And then anyone else have a comment there?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage, especially since we live in a drier climate here in Utah, having a humidity regulator pack is a very good idea if you're trying to store your cannabis for a long period of time and you want to avoid it drying up. So I would definitely consider finding one if you can. And again, that's just a humidity regulator pack. You just throw it right in the jar and it'll keep your cannabis fresh longer. And so moving right along. So terpenes, not only do they have some medical benefits, but they are the main kind of sculptor for cannabis's effects. So let's, like I said, they play a major role in determining the effect of any given cannabis product. Dr. Anden, can you explain a little bit about what terpenes are and kind of walk us through this slide a little bit more?
Sure. So terpenes, or terpenoids, we say cannabinoids, flavonoids, serpenoids, terpenes for short, are the volatile aromatic compounds that are in many different plants. So aromatic means that they smell. So that's the smell and the flavor of many different plants, including cannabis. So cannabinoids are kind of unique to cannabis. Terpenes are in lots of different plants in the world. Volatile means that they leach out into the air. So they're very smelly. So you don't have to get too close to the plant the plant is just sending those terpenes out into the world, easy to smell. So that's another reason to store your cannabis flower, because the terpenes are leaching out, they're leaving the flower if the flower is just setting out. So terpenes help the cannabinoids work better, but just like Olivia talked about with the plant making the trichomes and the cannabinoids, they're not necessarily made for us. They're made for the protection of the plant to allow it to reproduce and survive in the world. So terpenes also act as attractors of pollinators and repelling pests and that sort of thing. So how do they interact with the endocannabinoid system? I think that's another area of good research, but terpenes are basically oils. So doTERRA oils or aromatherapy are basically terpenes. So we know that the cannabis plant has more than 200 different terpenes, and a lot of those are similar, as we can see in the chart on the right, of what other plants contain. It's just that cannabis has a lot of them, 200 in every, plant. So they interact in our nervous system. So for example, like linalool is in lavender, and the effects that it induces are calming and relaxing. Whereas another terpene like pinene that's in pine trees is more activating and energizing. Different effects is the way it works in our central nervous system to cause different effects. Olivia, do you want to add there?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, there are certain terpenes that really, interact very, very closely with the ECS, with the endocannabinoid system. Like you have beta caryophyllene, for example, which is one of the larger terpenes. It's kind of a big molecule, but it actually is a direct agonist. So it directly uses the CB2 receptor. So that's something that's going to really help with things like inflammation and immune response and things like that. And then you also have them helping with things like crossing barriers in the body, whether it's the blood-brain barrier or skin or whatever it is. Terpenes kind of get in there and help the cannabinoids get around.
Gotcha. And so is there any medicinal difference or benefit of botanical terpenes? So meaning, extracting that from, a lemon peel or whatnot versus cannabis-derived terpenes, or do the terpenes from both sources provide the same effects?
So the molecules themselves are going to be exactly the same. So you're going to find that, myrcene is the same molecule, whether you find it in cannabis or in a mango. That said, the matrix that it's within, or those other chemicals that are in there with it, are probably going to make a difference. But if you're taking it, whether it's from a plant or from cannabis, you're getting a slightly different matrix of chemicals within that. So, I think it's kind of similar to, we haven't quite hit the like Indica Sativa yet here, but similar to how, different types of cannabis all have THC. It's the same molecule in all those types, and that does the exact same thing, but then depending on what else is in there with it, it's going to affect how it's actually affecting you.
Perfect. And then Dr. Anden, I know when we were kind of putting this presentation together, you had, I know you wanted to talk about the terpene concentrations in the various cannabis products. Care to shed some more light on that?
Sure. So terpenes are very potent, and most plants, and particularly cannabis, the total terpene concentration ranges 4 to 6%, maybe up to 7%. So that's, the plant's not half terpenoids. Even though pine trees have a strong smell, it just speaks to the potency of those. So when you have cannabis flower, it's going to have in that range 4 to 6% terpene concentration. So terpenes can be harsh for the body. Some of them are used as solvents, meaning they can dissolve things. So when we eat terpenes, you can eat a lot of terpene content because our body digests it and gets rid of it. But when we're breathing in those terpenes, we want to make sure in the products that are processed, distillates that have added terpenes combined with them, typically botanical terpenes, say in a vape cartridge, we really don't want to exceed that 4 to 6% terpene concentration, because if there's 14% terpene concentration, that can make your product very harsh for inhalation, could be potentially damaging to the lungs in the short term and particularly in the long term. So I think processors are getting to be more aware of that, where, as a consumer, you're like, oh, this smells and tastes really good, but too high of a terpene content can be perhaps damaging to the lungs via inhalation. So I just hope that processors keep that in mind when adding the terpenes.
Beautiful. I think that's some great information for patients to be aware of. And I saw a comment or a question asking specifically about terpinolene and how that or what the effects of that terpene are. And terpinolene generally provides an uplifting and calming effect overall. It's typically found in lilac, pine, or coriander, and can potentially help promote or improve sleep. I hope that answers your question from the chat.
We also have a question for Olivia.
It's also anti-prolifer. It helps, essentially, you fight brain tumor cells. It's anti-proliferative for brain tumor cells.
Super important. Okay.
We have a question for Olivia.
All right.
Does Boojum use cannabis-derived terpenes rather than botanical-derived terpenes?
We have cannabis-derived terpenes in our FSO, but when we add terpenes to our products, like our gummies, we add botanical terpenes.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
I'd like to add also, as scientists are analyzing different cannabis varieties, what we call chemovars, there are terpenes that are more common than others. So myrcene is the terpene that hard to get away from. Just about every cannabis variety or chemovar has myrcene. And it tends to cluster a combination of myrcene, beta-caryophyllene, and limonene in probably at least 50% of chemovars have some combination of those three, one higher than the others, making the different chemovars different. Terpinolene dominant strains tend to be about 20%. Pinene is maybe in about 6% of strains. And then the other ones are kind of mixtures.
And that's like the terpene profile, right?
In the terpene profile across the board.
Gotcha.
So yeah, a lot of strains are myrcene, beta-caryophyllene, limonene in different percentages.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. And moving right along. So now that we understand the various components of the cannabis plant, I think we really need to touch on the entourage effect and basically utilizing the full spectrum of therapeutic compounds found in the cannabis plant. And so the term entourage effect was first coined by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam and his team of researchers in the late 1990s. I really wanted to take a moment to cast a spotlight on Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. For those of you that don't know in the audience, we're all standing on his shoulders as far as our understanding of phytocannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system, our receptors, our endocannabinoids. This gentleman, he's still alive today, but he was the first person to isolate THC, CBD back in the 60s. He has contributed so much to our understanding. And one of those contributions, again, was kind of coining this term entourage effect. And what it refers to is the proposed mechanism by which cannabis compounds act synergistically with each other to modulate the overall psychoactive and medicinal effects of the plant. So much like, we have Wholesome, Boojum, and Human Nature and Dr. Corey Anden working together on this presentation to maximize the education you all get from it, the components of the Cannabis Plant Act in very similar ways. And Olivia, would you mind maybe just touching real quickly on some of the components of the entourage effect outside of phytocannabinoids and terpenes?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'd like to mention just this really interesting and cool, kind of cool, kind of not cool, I guess, that Raphael Mechoulam is at the University of Jerusalem, I think, but he's in Israel. So they've essentially been allowed to study cannabinoids there, which is why we know what we do. Like, we have all of this information because they were allowed to research it, and they did. And now we've discovered the endocannabinoid system, whereas, here and in a lot of other countries, there's been no research allowed. So we wouldn't know anything if it weren't for these guys.
I know, thank goodness.
Exactly. But yeah, so in the entourage effect, we have the phytocannabinoids, which we've talked about. We have the terpenes and terpenoids. Those are so interchangeable. It can be really frustrating if you're trying to look into those. Essentially, terpenoids have oxygen in them, whereas terpenes are just basically simple hydrocarbons. So they're just hydrogen and carbon. But you'll see both words used for pretty much all of the terpenes in all over the place. It's incredibly confusing. And then there's flavonoids. So flavonoids are essentially phytonutrients that you have in all different kinds of plants. So this is kind of why they say eat your medicine and things like that. And the terpenes also kind of harken back to traditional medicine and things like that, where you have these chemicals, antioxidants, and the different ones, they all have different things that they help with. But essentially, you can find those in your food. And you can also find them in cannabis. They're made in the trichomes as well. So these are all different components that are in the trichomes of cannabis. And the idea with the entourage effect is that they're all just affecting each other. For example, if you take some THC and you take some CBD, the effect that you get is not the simple sum of those two effects. Instead, you have the CBD kind of lessening certain, negative effects of THC, like the tachycardia, your heart beating really fast, or things like that. It feels like there's a lot of kind of back and forth in the scientific community about whether this exists and what it is. But I think if you just use common sense, the fact that you are taking in hundreds of chemical compounds when you consume cannabis, and the effects of that are not going to be a simple addition of what you're taking in. Instead, they're all, they're competing for enzymes, they're changing the receptors for each other, they're doing all kinds of things while they're in the body that are going to change how that cannabis affects you.
Beautiful. Thank you for breaking it down for us like that. That was good stuff. And so, Dr. Anden, can you tell us a little bit more too about how this kind of comes up as a clinician, and maybe what kind of products you'd recommend to that effect?
So adding to what Olivia said, it is a complicated system. And if we think about it, when we talk about pharmaceuticals, generally pharmaceutical drugs are one chemical, maybe two chemicals, like, Tylenol with hydrocodone as a common opioid. But pharmaceuticals have one or two chemicals, and they're developed and scientists study them, and it can take them 10, 15 years to bring them to market if they've proven that they're safe and how they work and how they interact. So we're talking about 140 cannabinoids, 200 terpenes, 100 flavonoids. So we have 500 chemicals that the cannabis plant is making. It's going to take a long time for scientists, if ever, to fully comprehend how all of these chemicals work together in the body, when it takes scientists many, many years to study one or two chemicals working together at the same time. So what we do know is that it's safe. There aren't fatal doses. And as Olivia pointed out, there are no receptors in the brainstem. So people are not going to stop breathing and die. So even though we don't necessarily fully understand the extent of the synergy, we know that it's working together, and that's how we have the effect. So they modulate each other so that some chemical isn't too high or too low to cause adverse effects. So patients will report, and I will suggest that they're going to have better effects from a full spectrum. That means whole plant, full spectrum, meaning that has the majority of the chemicals that the plant produced naturally working together. That's the way Mother Nature made it, and it balances out. And so the examples of products that we recommend that are full spectrum, you know, I like for my patients, once they know that, to sort of look for that on the label. Does it say full spectrum, broad spectrum, whole plant? So full spectrum means everything. Broad spectrum means it has less THC, to less psychoactive effects. So obviously flower is going to be full spectrum because it hasn't been processed at all. It's just at the flower, the product of the plant naturally consumed. And then we have the full spectrum oils or the full extract cannabis oils. So that's FSO, FECO, and rosin are generally minimally manipulated flower. So heat and pressure to extract those oils from the trichomes. So again, we have the chemicals that the plant made. And I'm a proponent of those types of products. The less processing, the better. But of course, we have other products that contain quite a number of those chemicals when we get to edibles and sprays and tinctures and that sort of thing. And Olivia, you can speak to those types of products maybe as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so those are kind of the forms you mentioned, like FSO, FECO, flower, and rosin, are sort of in contrast to things like distillate and isolate, which is where, you know, you've stripped away most of the terpenes and other cannabinoids, depending on what cannabinoid you're targeting there. You know, we use FSO for all of our THC stuff. We do sometimes use distillate for CBD for certain uses, especially things like for animals or things like that, where you don't want the whole plant. And there are cases like that where you're not necessarily going to want all of those cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids. But definitely, I would agree with you for the most part. Like, we try and use our FSO as much as possible, or our rosin. We make a rosin, which really keeps even more than the FSO in terms of terpenes and flavonoids. But yeah, FSO is the way to go, in my opinion.
Beautiful. Excellent, guys. Thank you so much. And moving right along. So, you know, now that we've kind of gone through the endocannabinoid system, we understand the ins and outs of it a little bit better. We wanted to leave you guys on this final topic of understanding the different cannabis varieties. And really, we want to take some time to kind of point out some maybe misconceptions or some, you know, better ways to think about cannabis varieties. You know, traditionally it's been Sativa and Indica, but we're also going to take a moment to explain how you can make better purchasing decisions by using some of the information that we covered earlier in this presentation. So before getting into that, I would like to hand it over to Olivia. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on this whole Sativa versus Indica debate or battle that's been kind of going on in certain communities, and even talk about the difference between cultivar and strain. I know a lot of people have talked about wanting to move towards using cultivar as the nomenclature versus instead of strain. Can you maybe speak to some of that for us?
I can start with Indica Sativa, but you might have to hit the strain one for me.
Okay, sure.
But Indica and Sativa is a pet peeve of mine, and I think probably a lot of other people in the industry. So where it came from was in the 1700s. Somebody sent a sample of cannabis from Afghanistan to Linnaeus, who's like the guy who named everything scientifically, essentially. And he was like, "Oh, this is Cannabis Sativa." Sativa means cultivated. 50 years later, somebody sent some cannabis from India to a new guy, Lamarck. He was like, "Oh, this is Cannabis cannabis indica, right? And so to me, it's like someone sent a dog, who knows if it was a wild dog or a pet dog or what, to somebody in Europe from the Middle East, and it was a spunky dog. And so he's like, oh, this is sativa. And then someone sent one from somewhere else that was lazy, and oh, that's indica. And now you're trying to, you know, trace back your Labrador retriever to find out which it is. And it's just, you know, it's not really possible. There are certainly genetic strains that go through the generations, but humans have been cultivating cannabis for thousands and thousands of years. Some is domestic, essentially, some is wild, it's from all over the place. But there were never just two species that, you know, we hybridized to make what we wanted. That's not to say that those effects are not there, because there definitely are those effects, but it's the terpenes that's causing them. So instead of looking and being like, oh, did this dog come from like ancestors in Afghanistan that were spunky? You can look at the dog and look at its genes and be like, oh, this dog has, you know, spunky genes. But essentially, you know, the idea being that terpenes are really what is causing those effects. And so you can have, and terpenes react differently for everybody. So most people, for example, myrcene is sedating. It's the kind of like, it's one of those things that I saw some random statistic that was like, you know, indica means it has more than 50% myrcene or something like that, which is not true. But for most people, myrcene is sedating. That's not going to be the same for everybody, but as a general rule, there's certain, you know, terpenes that drive the effect in a certain direction. So for uplifting or morning things, you're going to want to look for things like limonene or pinene, which are more focusing and energetic. For nighttime, you're going to look for something more like myrcene, maybe terpineol, which really kind of just quiets your muscles down a little bit. And then I think most terpenes would probably just be able to be classified as daytime. So something like beta caryophyllene or humulene or things like that, that don't have a specific sedating or energetic take to them.
Perfect. Yeah. And so, you know, all perfect points. I want to touch on some of them, but before I do want to point out too that here at WholesomeCo, you know, for some of those reasons that Olivia was mentioning, that, you know, sativa and indica just really isn't the best, you know, scientifically speaking, way to kind of categorize these the different cannabis varieties. So, you know, at WholesomeCo, we've chosen to kind of go with daytime, nighttime varieties and hybrid varieties to make it a little bit more easier for our patients to kind of understand these terms. And like she said, it's really the terpenes that are driving whether a particular cannabis cultivar is going to give you a more uplifting effect, which is better to use during the daytime, or a more sedating type of effect, which is better to use at nighttime. And then, of course, there are hybrid varieties that have, you know, that can have components and terpenes of both, you know, daytime and nighttime varieties that provide a more balanced effect. And so really it's those terpenes that you guys want to be keeping an eye out for. And real quick, before I move on, I do want to also just kind of point out that cultivars are also a better term than using or calling, you know, your cannabis by strain names. Strains really are more so for bacterias and things of that nature, whereas cultivar, since this is a plant, you know, it's a more accurate term. So, you know, I think we really want to take this opportunity, since Utah has a new medical cannabis program, to try and, like, you know, course correct our terminology and give you guys some better vocabulary terms to speak more accurately to this this new form of medicine. And so the last thing I kind of want to leave you all with, and I'll totally open it up to our other presenters to add, but tips for purchasing your flower. So say, for example, you find you know, whatever particular cultivar is working really good for you. Let's say it's white chocolate, right? Ask your pharmacist, ask your pharmacy agent, or check the label, or look up, you know, check it out on Leafly, but identify what those dominant terpenes are in that particular cannabis cultivar or strain that you've purchased. So, so like I said, if white chocolate is working, the strain or cultivar white chocolate is working really well at managing your conditions, make sure you take a moment to identify what those dominant terpenes are. And the reason why I encourage you all to do that is because if you go to your pharmacy to make another purchase and you want to get that strain, but it's out of stock, well, you know what the dominant terpenes were in white chocolate. So you can go to your pharmacy agent, you can go to your pharmacist and ask, hey, I'm looking for a strain, white chocolate worked really great for me. These were the dominant terpenes that I noted. Do you have another particular cultivar that has a similar profile or terpene dominance that white chocolate did? And while it may not give you exactly the same identical effect, it'll at least be something close. So this is a really important tool, I think, to help you guys make some more informed purchasing decisions. And by all means, we'd be happy to take some time, or either a pharmacist or pharmacy agents, to further elaborate on that. But I did want to leave you guys with that little tip of information there, and I hope that's helpful.
And I would just add that it is very easy. Just Google the particular white chocolate cannabis terpene profile, and it's not a deep dive. You'll have 10 different sites that you can choose from to investigate that. Google knows what you're asking.
Mm-hmm. It definitely does. It definitely does. The Leafly is also a really great resource as well. It's kind of like the Google for cannabis almost.
Right. But when you Google, Leafly will come up as a choice. And then
Totally.
there's, other ones that are a little more sort of chemistry based. So there's a lot of selections to sort of figure that out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I believe that kind of wraps up our presentation. I don't know if
I have questions people posted.
All right.
Sure. Oh, but before we get to the questions, Megan, actually, I just remembered. So I do want to show you guys, these are some helpful resources that you guys can use to learn a little bit more about some of the topics we covered. I really encourage you to check out Boojum Group's and Corey Anden's blog pages. Amazing information, amazing articles. A lot of the posters that we had in this presentation were pulled from Boojum Group's website. Again, I can't stress enough, they have amazing content there. So definitely I encourage you guys to check that out and learn a little bit more. Take a screenshot real quick right now so you can save some of these web addresses for later. But again, a lot of really good information on some of these links for you guys. And then lastly, again, I know we've got some questions in the queue, but before we hop into those, I just really want to encourage everyone, check us all out on Facebook. We're already on Facebook, so make sure to like WholesomeCo, but also make sure to check out Boojum Group, Human Nature Medical, and Utah Patients Coalition. You can see our Instagram handles there as well. And lastly, of course, if you haven't checked out our delivery services, we highly encourage you to give that a shot. We're delivering to the vast majority of the state right now. We've been getting a lot of great feedback. I think that's a really nice service that we're offering. So definitely check that out. And Megan, if you don't mind, what are those cues?
Okay, yep. Somebody asked what terpene sites, so you just kind of covered that. I did find a lot on Google. On Google Images is great. I love the wheels. That's always a good one. You can look up your specific conditions. I'm always like trying to find the correct one for pain and seizures for myself. It's really great for yourself with your specific conditions.
And can you wait? So what was that wheel that you were mentioning? I think that's.
So if you go to Google and you put in terpenes, cannabis terpenes, you will find a wheel with all the terpenes and conditions. Leafly does have a really good one, and you'll find it on there. There's also a lot of really great Canadian sites that have some.
They might present the terpene profile in a wheel form, or other graph forms. There's different ways they could present it, but the wheels are beautiful.
The wheels are beautiful and they're colorful, and it's nice, and you'll find it's great. It's sad that Utah doesn't allow you to smell the flower, because you'll in other states and countries. I've been to dispensaries in different countries too, that they allow you to smell the flower and you can find it directly for your body. It's really nice.
Very
No,
nice.
it was really quiet the whole entire time, but
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's good. That's another way that they say you can smell, and if that's what your body needs, it will agree with your body, and you'll be able to select the
yeah,
right
same thing with
product.
essential oils. That
Correct.
I love the smell of lime and the way that the lime smells. It makes you smell happy, and it helps with that. And
Mhm.
so that tells me that I would want limonene in my. I can't speak today. In my cannabis.
Yeah.
It's the same things. Okay. Let's,
Yeah, you would look for varieties or products that are high in the limonene. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Somebody asked, why is most Utah flower THCA?
Most flour generally is going to be THCA because it hasn't been heated yet. So that's why, again, if you just ate the flour straight, you might get THCA, which can be beneficial for things, but you're not going to get a psychoactive effect of it because you haven't yet burned it essentially, or, put enough heat to it to break off that little carboxylic acid and turn it into THC.
Yeah, all raw cannabis flower is going to have the acid cannabinoids,
Yeah.
THCA, or if it was hemp flower, CBDA. It doesn't. That's the whole process of the decarboxylation with heat to a certain temperature that changes the chemical structure to the THC or the CBD without the A. Without the
So
A, yeah.
that's not a Utah problem. It's a flower
It's not
issue.
a problem. It's not a problem.
I know it's not a problem. I understand that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just somebody asked a
biology.
question.
Yeah,
It's the raw flower. It has not been decarbed yet.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, I understand that. Just so everybody's
The
aware,
patients know.
THCA
Yeah.
is really good for seizures, and it's very healthy for us.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
want the psychoactive
Yeah,
part of it, you want it to help with the pain, you need to decarb it.
right. And if you go to California, you go to Oregon, you go to Washington, it doesn't matter. All flour has the
All
acid.
flour has not been decarbed.
All
It's not been
flour has
heated.
the acid. Yeah.
Right. Too bad that the DEA didn't understand that with all those stone
Well,
bunnies.
I see that as a loophole, but I don't know.
I'm sorry. Any chance I get to make fun of stone bunnies, I do. Okay, Shelley asked. She read somewhere that is it true that there's the more cannabis is introduced to the body, that the more receptors you have?
No.
No, it's
Okay.
actually the opposite. The more, if you overdo with the cannabis, your endocannabinoid system will down regulate. So
Okay.
if you take more cannabis than your body can react to, or the receptors can respond to, then they actually lower the number of receptors. So the tolerance that people talk about, let's just say I am healthy and I have 1,000 receptors. If I take too high doses of cannabis, my body will react by making now 750 receptors. And if it's not working, so I do more and more, my body will downregulate. Now I have 500 receptors. So
Is that why we need to reset?
so then you reset, or you find what your Goldilocks dose is,
Mm-hmm.
Somehow translated into milligrams, and you figure out what your dose is, what works, and you kind of stay there. It's different from opioids. We don't build a tolerance like you have to take more and more and more and more. With cannabis, it's more like a little bell curve, and at the top is your optimal dose, and too little doesn't work, but too much doesn't work either.
And this is where withdrawal syndromes come from too, right? So when you stop taking cannabis, if you go cold turkey, you don't have that many receptors anymore if you've desensitized them or your body has retracted them. So then even though you still are going to have your natural endocannabinoids, there's not going to be enough receptors for the amount of natural endocannabinoids that you have. And so that's sort of when you get things like nausea and irritability. It tends to, I believe, come from, not having your normal number of receptors and not having phytocannabinoids to kind of make up the difference.
And so this is kind of reminding me, Dr. Anden, we were talking about kind of how to fortify or maximize your endocannabinoid system, towards the beginning of the presentation. So could taking a brief tolerance break of a few days be another way to kind of keep your endocannabinoid system a little bit more regulated?
Yes, it at a minimum 2 days, cannabis free. Maybe a little irritable, have a hard time sleeping, but it's not anything like, it's a mini withdrawal, but it's like not drinking coffee for a couple of days. It's very minimal, and your body will reset fairly quickly. And then you can again boost it with those things we talked about, plant-based diet, cold baths, cold showers, exercise, walking, all of that will help restore your endocannabinoid system.
Beautiful. Awesome.
Okay,
Well-
and another question, and this is to Olivia. Are we going to see high CBG strains from you?
Yeah, we hope so. It's coming. We're still working on getting the material, but yeah, we'd like
Okay.
CBG for sure.
And the last question,
On our CBD line as well, and get more products out there, because I really, I know that THC really has eclipsed kind of everything else in the medical market, but we still really, really believe in the power of CBD. Like, it does a lot of good. And I think the same for CBG. So I'm excited to get a lot more cannabinoid ratios out there.
that's good. I'm as an epilepsy patient, I make all my own CBD. I buy the flower and I make all my own CBD oil because I haven't been able to find it. I have to mix it all. So we would appreciate those of us who do use
But
CBD.
is it true, Olivia, that you would take less mature plants are going to have more CBG? I that's what I've read, and I'll be exploring that more. But
that's what I understand too. I'm not a cultivator or anything other, but because CBG is that essential, like the mother of all cannabinoids, they all come from that. If you harvest the plant before those enzymes get in and turn that to THC and CBD and CBC, then you should have more.
You're going to have more CBG.
You would think. So yeah, that's what I understand.
Yeah. Okay, our last question. Do you think, this would be to Dr. Anden, do you think that that cannabis would prevent a possible cytokine storm?
I think it's possible. But as we talked about, the CBD interacting with cannabinoids, THC, CBD, interacting with the endocannabinoid system modulates the immune system. So it's almost like we have to think that they're smart enough to know how much is a proper amount of cytokine reaction to fight infection and how much is too much. So it does modulate. So I think, but I don't know that there's any studies on that per se, but I think that it does help modulate the cytokine response to keep it in a more normal range. But I don't know that anybody studied use of CBD with, COVID patients, for example, right? So that would have been great to study, but
there was one study with it, THC out of Canada.
I'm not sure about like phytocannabinoids, but I know like with endocannabinoids, that there are certain, like the sea squirts have endocannabinoid systems that don't have receptors, but they use endocannabinoids to control the cytokines. I'm not really clear how it works beyond that, but I know that, those endogenous cannabinoids are, at least in other animals.
There's just so many different receptors that it interacts with and have different effects on cytokine production. I think it's just complicated right now. Scientists will have to figure out a way to sort of study that.
It's not ethical to put somebody in one to study it either.
Yeah.
They do animals. They sort of do preclinical studies. So you could study it in, animals, rodents,
You're right.
rabbits,
It's a good question.
Similar to us. That
Yeah.
can be studied that way. Yes.
Okay, those were our questions.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for keeping track of all of that and making sure that we got to them. My goodness, hey guys, it is getting close to my bedtime. We are approaching the 8:30 mark. I am so pleased with this classroom. We've had, we've been hovering around the 20 to 30 audience members throughout this whole thing. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed this information. I hope you enjoyed this content. Again, a huge, tremendous, big old thank you to Corey Anden with Human Nature Medical up in Ogden, Olivia Kulander, Chief Science Officer for Boojum, and Megan Keller with Utah Patients Coalition. This was a powerhouse of a group. I'm so thankful I got to work with you all. Thank you, audience, for sticking with us. Check us out on Facebook, check us out on Instagram. I think we're ready to wrap it up unless anyone else has a final goodbye.
I just want to thank you, Julian, for putting this together and doing the PowerPoint and modulating and emceeing this whole thing. Great. Thank you. It was
Thank you
very
so much,
fun.
Julie.
And thank you, other panel members.
Thank you all for making this happen and the audience for being here. I'm honored to be included.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really great.
Alrighty, well,
Thank you.
we're happy to do this. I do want to let you all know we're going to be taking a little break from Cannabis Night School for a few weeks, but we're going to be coming back better than ever. So thank you all for tuning in. You can see all our previous Cannabis Night Schools. They're recorded and saved onto our Facebook page. We've covered multiple different topics, so definitely go check that out. But in the meantime, stay classy, Salt Lake.
All right. Thank you. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night. Let's see. This is the part I always there.